let's look at what we know about human nature. You know, there's a whole lot of cultural and geographic differences, but underneath it all, we still are all human beings. So the first one is that fear prevents learning from taking place. If you're in a fearful situation, your stress hormones are operating, a whole lot of things are going on in your brain, and we know that when you're in that stressful environment, your brain does not relax sufficiently for any information to go into long-term memory. To counteract that, the desire for mastery is innate in all human beings. It's innate. If that weren't the case, we'd still be crawling. Okay? Who is telling that young child when they're starting to learn to walk, you better get up and walk, it's important? Okay? And what happens when that child is learning to walk? First, they take a step, and what happens? They fall down, and then they take another step, and they fall down. Now, the interesting thing is we've studied this a lot. Here's what's very interesting with those little children who are just learning to walk, is we put them in some very safe observational conditions where they're with their caregiver, and we give a signal to the caregiver just in that tentative state where they're walking but they're not confident. And we say to the caregiver, and it can be a parent, it can be a teacher, but it has to be somebody that they're familiar with and they trust, is we ask them to introduce some caution into their comments when they're walking. And so that person, using their own language, will say, be careful, watch out. Guess what happens to that child? They either fall or they sit down. And often they don't get up for 2 weeks before they take the next step. Because we've just introduced fear into a natural developmental process. Now, we think we reach that developmental process and we reach a plateau. No, we don't. We still have it within us, every one of us. The people who are still alive and enjoying their lives are still learning. They're still developing as they move forward. So we know that mastery is innate, but we also know that mastery of any complex task takes time and practice to develop. That's why making mistakes is important. But our tendency for experts is the first thing that an expert in their field notices when somebody else is learning is what's not right. They don't learn they don't see what's wrong. I mean, they see what's wrong. They don't automatically focus on what's right first. And so the first words that tend to come out of an expert is, this is wrong. Okay? And then we heard all today what you need to do differently when you're in that situation. We also know that all humans respond automatically to positive motivational tools. We need constructive feedback to improve performance. Every time that child falls, they're getting feedback, real-time feedback. But we don't set that up. And here's the interesting thing about feedback, is we set up our organizational structures and we do performance reviews of individuals. They're usually annually. And that is not feedback. That's a history lesson. Because you talk about things that happened so far ago, you couldn't have corrected it back then. And so feedback has to happen during the time frame in which the learning is taking place. And it has to be done in a way that people can actually absorb that. So I know all of you were focusing on that with your children. I mean, the children in your schools. I heard that again and again and again today. What are you doing with your staff? Are you setting up opportunities for learning and feedback and positive growth? All historical management models that are very prevalent are not that way at all. Not that way at all. And the other thing is that when given a chance, people want to be something greater than ourselves. So the point is that we actually know a great deal about human nature, that if we apply these, we actually can get to effectiveness. So it's not a question of being a good or bad leader. It's a question of how effective can you become. But you have to start adopting more of a learner's mind within yourself. And I'm just so grateful with John, is that all of the people in the LEAP schools, we have the future leaders, but we have every person in your staff going through this exercise of self-development, self-awareness, and self-development. So the 21st century leadership has to tap into the positive aspects of human nature. You need to do with yourself and with others that are in the leadership in your own organization the same same thing that I'm hearing you're trying to do with your own students. But we know a lot about, when you apply knowledge about human nature that you're doing in your classrooms, you can start applying it to your management and leadership principles within yourself. But we do know that transformational leadership requires very strong emotional intelligence. And the 4 qualities of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and self-management. And that's the personal aspect of it. It's the other kind of smart. And some people are born with very strong emotional intelligence. But everybody can improve on it. And there are very good objectives tests, but it is a skill development process. And then there is a second part, after you've worked on self-awareness and self-management, is you need to become and develop your social competence, which is social awareness, and then relationship management. And you don't get to good relationship management until you've done some of this other work. So that's why we say leadership begins from the inside out, if you wish to become a transformational leader. We know the qualities that transformational leaders need to have, and we can develop the curriculum, the program, the exercises, but it's all tied to an individual's decision to actually engage in their own leadership journey.